Welcome to the Alphagenix Podcast, where every week we talk to incredible guests from around the world of biohacking, well-being, men's health, and more. Here's your host, co-founder of Alphagenix, Ross Tomkins.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today's guest, renowned author of Head First and Nootropics expert, David Tomen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I stumbled across your work last year and bought the book straight away. But for anyone who hasn't heard about you and what you do you want to start at the beginning? You know, who are you? How did you get pulled into this world and what do you do?
Okay. It's a bit of a long story.
Go for it.
I have, we were just prior to us starting to record this session, we were talking about different places in the world. I've traveled to 45 countries and I've lived in several of them, and wherever I ended up, because I've got a business degree, I ended up in some executive position with a big company. And when you do that, you've got a boss, and that boss every year will sit you down and give you a performance review, wherever in the world I happen to be. So every year the boss would sit me down, whatever boss it was, and said, David, you're a fantastic executive. You're a great manager. You're a good executive. People love working with you. You're a good salesperson, but you've got to learn how to focus. And then the next year rolled around and David, you're fantastic here, blah, blah, blah. You've got to learn how to focus every single year. So I went out and I bought the books on how to focus, and I bought the books on how to be a better executive. I couldn't get it. I mean, I tried my hardest and I could not get it. I thought it was a moral failing. I was blaming myself. And then this was 2001, I guess. I met this gorgeous blonde girl in North Miami Beach and fell in love and instantly, and we got married 6 months later. And within the first year that we were together, she saw what was going on. And so she sent me to see a psychiatrist in Palm Beach that she knew. And this guy just turned out to be a rock star. He sat me down in his office, and within 10 minutes, he diagnosed me adult ADD and PTSD. And for ADD, he prescribed Ritalin. Mm-hmm. And the very first day that I took Ritalin, it was like someone turned the lights on in my brain. For the first time in my life, I could focus. I mean, it was just a freaking miracle. I went, whoa, this is what it's like to be normal. And that's when it finally dawned on me that it wasn't my fault that this was happening. It was genetic or something. And I was adult ADD for the longest time, and I didn't know it. So fast forward a couple of years, I grew tolerant to Ritalin. And I panicked. And I'm going, I finally get something that's going to work and it's going to stop working. I don't think so. But there were no websites on this back then. There were no books on this back then. I had to find out myself how methylphenidate worked, how Ritalin worked. And that was reading clinical studies. So I went to PubMed and I found out that methylphenidate was a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And if it's not working anymore, maybe I don't have enough dopamine in my brain. How do I fix that? And I found out that L-tyrosine was a precursor to the synthesis of dopamine. And during my research, I also found that brain cell signaling was a problem with ADD and ADHD, and that's largely dependent on acetylcholine. So how do you increase acetylcholine? I found out that CDP, one of the things that I also found out that not only dopamine was a problem, but brain cell signaling was a problem in ADD and ADHD. And it was largely dependent on acetylcholine. And I found out that CDP choline, along with LCAR as a cofactor, were needed to make more acetylcholine. So there was a GNC around the corner where we were living at the time. So I got some L-tyrosine and CDP choline and LCAR, and I brought it home and I started using it, and Ritalin started working again. And every time I took a Ritalin dose, I used this stack. I never heard the word nootropic yet. It was just, I found out there were supplements that helped the human brain. But I found out that if I took when you're using stimulants like that, you typically crash later on the day when the stimulant wears off. I found out that if I used this stack again around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I didn't crash. So that was my nootropic stack for adult ADD. And I have never, actually, I decreased my Ritalin dose when I started using that. I've never had to increase my Ritalin dose since then. I've never, again, grown tolerant to it. I don't crash later on in the day from using Ritalin. It has not done any brain damage because of the supplements that I'm using, because I'm doing ongoing maintenance and repair. And that was my introduction to supplements that help the human brain.
Wow.
So then when fast forward a few years and I ended up in the ER, and I thought that I was going to die. I literally felt like, because I felt so awful. And my wife took me to the ER because she thought I was having a heart attack. It turns out it wasn't a heart attack. I was suddenly hypothyroid for some bizarre reason, and really hypothyroid. And they put me on Synthroid, which is synthetic T4. Didn't work. Kept on getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So again, I went back to my research and I found out that there was a thing called natural desiccated thyroid, which they get from a cow, I believe. And I found I couldn't get any doctor to prescribe it because everybody was prescribing Synthroid. But my brother was a doctor up north, and I told him what was going on. And so he got his hands on some natural desiccated thyroid. Somebody is coming down to South Florida on holiday. They hand delivered some natural desiccated thyroid. I started using them, and I started getting better. Now, during this time, one of the things that, if you ever looked at the symptoms for hypothyroidism, it's a page that's 2 columns. I had about 3/4 of those symptoms, and one of them was total memory loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to 2 different neurologists, and they tested me for early onset Alzheimer's. And they put me through the regular battery of tests that they do for Alzheimer's, and I did perfect on both tests. And they just threw up their hands. They said, you know what? It's not Alzheimer's. It's not dementia. We don't know what's wrong with you. We can't help you. So it was back to reading clinical studies to find out how memory worked in the human brain. And I added to my stack a few supplements, and it took about 2.5 years, but I finally got my memory back.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that is how I got in. By then, I had been introduced to the word nootropics, and I had heard it. And then, so after I got better, within a couple of years, I decided that I was going to start working again, and I started writing copy. And I was writing copy for supplement companies, and I was writing copy for a company in the UK, doing some editorials for them. And the CEO of that company said, "This is the best copy I've ever seen." And while I was writing this, when you're writing sales copy, one of the things that you must do if you want anybody to buy anything is you've got to back up everything that you're saying with proof, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's clinical studies. And when I was doing this, I had to go to PubMed and other online journals to get my hands on these studies. And I realized that, if Ross had problems with memory or OCD or anxiety or depression or whatever, how's he going to find this information? If Sally had a problem with anxiety, or Georgette had a problem with depression or whatever, how does an ordinary person get their hands on this information? And that's when I decided that I was going to start Nootropics Access, just because the world needed it. Mm-hmm. They needed access to this information that I was finding, and I was able to translate it into plain English so that the average person could understand it. And I just started writing, and here we are.
Brilliant. So when was that? When did you start?
That was 7 years ago.
When, sorry?
It's 7 years ago. I founded Nootropics Expert, January of 2016.
Wow. It's really interesting listening to you talk, because 10 years ago, I went to the hospital with symptoms of low mood, low energy, low libido, terrible brain fog. And the first thing they said was, your thyroid isn't working. Later, my testosterone was a problem. And they put me on a synthetic thyroid medication, levothyroxine here in the UK. And I felt awful, absolutely terrible. And I kept going back to the doctors and saying, I feel worse. And they were doing my bloods and saying, no, you're better. We can see on your bloods you're better. And I was going, I feel worse. And I know my body better than you do. You can't tell me how I feel. And eventually, did my own research, went back to the endocrinologist and said, I want to try an NDT. And they said, we don't prescribe NDTs in the UK.
Mhm.
So I had to go private. And that totally changed my life. Like, what a difference.
Yeah. Well,
Quite amazing.
one of the things that was going on when this was going on with hypothyroidism and memory loss, one of the things that I suspected too is I was dealing with low testosterone. And so I got my labs done. And I'm not sure what you use in the UK. For here, total testosterone, it goes from 250 to 1100.
Yeah.
And I came in at 799. And so any mainstream doctor would look at that and go, you're fine, you don't have a problem. But I knew I had a problem.
Yeah.
And so I went from doctor to doctor, and I finally found a nurse practitioner that was hooked up with Life Extension here in Fort Lauderdale. And she ran my labs. And again, I was like 799, 800, something like that for total testosterone. She shot testosterone pellets into my butt, ran my labs again, and I shot up to 1300, which is 200 over the bell curve. That's where I feel normal.
Yeah. And that's a really important point you raise, isn't it? Because we're all different.
Yep.
Like, we all look different. Our insides are different too. What's right for one person is not going to be right for everybody. So it's great that you found a health professional who looked at you that way.
Like you, I had to go through from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor. I must have fired 7 different endocrinologists.
Yeah. It's a interesting world we live in, isn't it? But there are people out there now, willing to look at things a little differently, which is great.
And they're few and far between. The unfortunate thing is most doctors do not learn this in med school.
No.
They don't. For thyroid, they learn about TSH. And because the pharmaceutical company that invented Synthroid is financing these med schools, and all they're taught about is, find out where their TSH is, and if their TSH is low, then give them Synthroid. And that's all they know. They don't learn about, I just went through this with the Cleveland Clinic. I had to change primary care doctors because of insurance. And the young lady doctor that I was working with, she saw that I was using NP thyroid, which is natural desiccated thyroid. It's similar to Armour, but I use a really high dose, like 60 milligrams 3-4 times a day. And she looked at my TSH from my last labs, and it was almost like nothing, like almost zero. She said, well, you're on too much thyroid medication. I'm going, oh no, here we go again.
It's such a sort of a nuanced area of medicine, isn't it? There are very few people who delve into it as much. And I guess the same with the nootropics. I guess most doctors you speak to have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
They don't. And I've got a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses and a lot of chiropractors and other people that are medical professionals on my list. And find out after talking to them that they're not taught this in medical school. They're not. They spend something like 3 hours out of 6 years on nutrition.
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy, isn't it?
If some of them take the initiative and find out on their own, how this stuff works, and they end up on your list or on my list to find out. Thank God.
Yeah. What do you think the potential is with nootropics? I think, a lot of people think about them and start looking at them. They think of the film Limitless, and the guy takes a pill and all of a sudden the world opens up and start seeing things differently. Do you think that we'll ever get to that sort of level or not?
Eventually, I think that it will. Just like a lot of things that are changing in our society, because it's kind of like open source. People are taking matters into their own hands. They're taking their health into their own hands. And if a doctor cannot help, their doctor cannot help them, they're willing to shop for a doctor and to finally find somebody that's willing to work with them. I was fortunate that I found a naturopath, an old guy in Sunny Isles here, which is on the beach just north of Miami Beach, I was diagnosed insulin resistant and pre-diabetic. But rather than prescribing metformin, he prescribed berberine.
Yeah.
And I started using berberine, and my sugar levels went back to normal. And when you look at clinical studies show that berberine is as effective for this as metformin is in study after study after study. Which is a big deal. That's important to know.
Definitely. And I think it's still a really high percentage of pharmaceuticals are derived from plants. So, I guess we shouldn't be that surprised that the world around us, nature, has an answer to a lot of these things.
And the pharmaceutical companies are certainly aware of this. And the proof is here in the States. There's one of my favorite supplements is called vinpocetine. It's the best thing that I've found to increase blood flow in your brain.
Oh, wow.
By far. It's an extract of the lesser periwinkle plant. It's actually a prescription drug in some countries in Europe. But here in the States, it was a dietary supplement. It's been sold as a dietary supplement for decades. And 3 years ago, the FDA banned it. Why? Because one of the pharmaceutical companies saw what was going on and its popularity, and they decided they wanted to make a drug out of it.
Right.
And the same thing happened with N-acetylcysteine, or NAC. This was a couple of years ago. They tried to ban NAC. And unlike vinpocetine, NAC is extremely popular. I mean, they use it in emergency rooms here. And NAC is a precursor to the synthesis of glutathione. So when you use NAC, it helps make glutathione in your system. It helps boost your immune system. But there was such a big blowback from the supplement industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, that the FDA backed down. And now there's more companies selling NAC now because the FDA is not willing to go after these companies.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Big pharma, the money that sort of goes around ultimately does dictate a lot of what they comes across.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical companies, they finance the medical schools. And then after doctors graduate, they're paid commissions when they prescribe certain drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
And the people who are advising them to prescribe those drugs are the sales reps who aren't even medical and have never seen a patient.
Correct.
Yeah. It's quite scary.
It is scary, but I run into these people every single day. People that are prescribed these drugs and it's messing up their life, and they want to switch to something natural, and they say, help, how do I do this?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you treat people yourself, or how does it work?
I do consultations with people practically every day, literally all over the world, and including Dubai. In Australia, the last couple I did were in Australia. And I'm not a doctor. I've never played one on TV. I'm just an ordinary guy I'm a marketing guy. I've been in sales and marketing all of my life, but I learned this stuff literally to save my own life. Mm-hmm. And I know enough about it now that I can advise other people to tell them where to look and what to try, but I can't prescribe it. I wouldn't dare attempt to prescribe anything, and I wouldn't dare tell someone to stop using a med that they're using. That's entirely their decision between them and their doctor. But I'm willing to provide information that if you're using this, well, we reverse engineer it, and well, you might want to try this because it does a similar thing, but it's natural.
Yeah, I like that. What's your personal sort of vision for your own future? Is it to live till you're 120, 180? Does longevity come into sort of your nootropic thoughts?
It does, but then I'm genetically predisposed to longevity anyway. I just want to be healthy for as long as I can be until in my old age. And I want the ability to be able to share what I have learned with as many people in the world as I possibly can, however I can, whether that's through podcasts like this, through books, through my website, through my YouTube channel. I'm just about, my community doesn't even know this yet, but I'm just about to start up a subscription service with a forum where people can go and join this forum and can talk about amongst themselves, because I see them they're trying to do that in the comments threads on my website and on my YouTube channel, but it's so disjointed because the comments threads are all, underneath individual supplements. And I want people, and so I see people chiming in and say, they see what I'm recommending to somebody and they've got their own experience with it. They jump in and say, this worked for me, you might want to try this. And I love that kind of input, but I want to make it easier for people. So I want to set up this forum so that there's one spot that people can go to.
I love that. And is that going to be on an app or on the website? How will that work?
It's going to be attached to the website. I'm going to do it through Patreon and Discourse.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously, we are all different. As we've already mentioned, we all look different. We all respond differently to different medications.
Yeah.
During all of your research, have you come across a handful, of just standout nootropics that seem to work for most people? Have you got like a favorite 5?
I do have some favorites, and what I've found too is some of the real fundamentals are critically important. Like a lot of people are deficient in magnesium.
Yeah.
Right. And magnesium is involved in something like 600 enzymatic reactions in your brain and body. It's a cofactor in the synthesis of all your major neurotransmitters. If you take L-tyrosine with the expectation of making dopamine and you're deficient in magnesium, you cannot make dopamine, right? Or the same thing with the precursors with any other neurotransmitter. Magnesium is involved in the development of red blood cells. It's a cofactor in the synthesis of myelin. Myelin is a protective coating around axons. It modulates ion channels. Magnesium attaches to the same GABA A receptor that Ambien attaches to, so it helps you sleep, right? So there's so many things that magnesium does, and a huge percentage of people are deficient in magnesium, but then they try the magnesium and they end up using the wrong form of magnesium and they don't get any benefit from it. So like with the metals, you need a chelated form of these metals, the same form that you would naturally get from food. Some of the cheaper supplements, like cheaper multivitamins and cheaper B complexes, they use synthetic vitamins, and the minerals are literally ground up raw. Okay? So you want a chelated form of magnesium. Forget about magnesium oxide or magnesium citrate. You want magnesium althreonate or magnesium biglycinate or magnesium glycinate or magnesium chlorate. 400 milligrams a day is what I found the average human needs, and take it before bed because it'll help you sleep. Another one that I found people are deficient in vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
And vitamin D is a cofactor in the synthesis of all of your major neurotransmitters, including serotonin. If you're deficient in vitamin D, you cannot make serotonin. I mean, it's involved in executive function and sensory gating. And anybody who has ADD or ADHD, they need vitamin D just for their brain to work properly, along with some other stuff. Tell you a little story about me and vitamin D. I live in South Florida, and we have tons of sun down here. The other place that you can get vitamin D is from the sun.
Yeah.
Now, most people can't lie nude in the sun 2 hours a day to get their vitamin D. So the only other way to get vitamin D is through a supplement. Now, it's available in certain foods too, but in such small quantities that you need a vitamin D supplement. So I live in South Florida. I was using 5,000 international units of vitamin D every single day for years. And this is about 3 years ago. I got my labs done. I was in the lower third of the bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
which totally took me by surprise. I'm going, what, really? So I upped it to 10,000 IU. The next time I got my labs done, I was in the middle of the bell curve. And every time I've got my labs done since then, I'm around the middle of the bell curve for vitamin D. Most people are deficient in vitamin D.
Yeah.
And it's
And,
critical.
and if they are supplementing, they're not taking enough.
Correct. You need to get your labs done and find out how much you need to use.
Yeah.
Right. Another thing that people are deficient in are omega-3s. And DHA, your brain is about 60% fat. Most of that fat is DHA. Every single one of your brain cells, of which you've got billions and billions and billions, is surrounded by a membrane. And that membrane is made up of DHA, phosphatidylserine, and phosphatidylcholine. And if you're deficient in any one of these lipids, that cell membrane starts to lose its permeability. And what that means is when that happens, the good stuff like water and oxygen and nutrients have a harder time getting into the cell, and the garbage and toxins have a harder time getting out of the cell. And how that manifests in everyday life is brain cell signaling suffers. So short-term and working memory is not as good. Your reaction time is not as good. You can't think on your feet. Verbal fluidity suffers. And worst case scenario is anxiety and depression. I mean, there are countless clinical studies that show that increasing EPA can cure depression, for example. But you need 1,000 milligrams per day of DHA, and then about half that of EPA. And when you take DHA as a supplement, it helps make EPA in your system too. So most people do. And the other thing, there's a thing called the omega-3 index, which measures the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3. And the ratio in Western society is something like 16 or 17 to 1 of 6s to 3s. And our ancestors were 1 to 1. So the only way that you can fix that ratio is by using an omega-3.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do this with any fish oil supplement that I've ever seen. And most omega-3s have more EPA than DHA, and even then, it's way, way too low of a dose. You really need a DHA supplement. And they do exist. They're few and far between, but they do exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can come up with a stack. So with somebody that's dealing with depression, for example, I can come up with a stack that works for them. And a month down, and one of those will be DHA. A month down the road, their depression is lifted, but something else will get the credit for it. It could be L-tyrosine because it boosted dopamine. It could be L-tryptophan because it boosted serotonin. It could be GABA because it boosted GABA. It could be acetylcholine. But really what should be getting the credit is the omega-3s that were finally increased to the point where they're healthy.
So do you find are there any of the omega-3s that are out there for sale that are any good?
Yes.
Or would you always go, there are?
Yeah, the thing is that fish don't make omega-3s. Most people don't realize that. Fish get their omega-3s from marine algae. So you'll see some omega-3s that are made from marine algae. That's why. That's the original source. When you use that type of omega-3 or DHA, you're kind of like skipping the middleman or skipping the middle fish.
Yeah.
But there are some highly distilled pure fish oils too that are just 2 gel caps will give you 1,000 milligrams of DHA. So they do exist.
Fantastic. So we've got magnesium, vitamin D, omega-3s as like a baseline.
Those are the most fundamental things. And then and then we start getting into things a little more complicated things like if I'm doing consultation with somebody who's vegan or vegetarian, chances are they're going to be deficient in things like vitamin B12, right? And there's other amino acids that you can only get from meat. And so one of the first things that I recommend that somebody do, depending on their age, if they're younger, I recommend a bioactive B complex because you're not getting these B vitamins from food, not in the quantities that you need. And if somebody's older, a bioactive B complex, but also a bioactive multivitamin. because
Yeah.
who thinks about molybdenum, right? Or manganese. I mean, you just don't think about that. It doesn't cross
Yeah.
your mind when you're looking to fix something. But if you take a look at what these things do, if you're deficient in any one of these nutrients, something's going to break.
Makes
And
sense.
so you need that base, that fundamental base, and then you start adding things onto it to fix whatever needs fixing, whether you're trying to increase neurotransmitters, or you're trying to reduce oxidative stress and free radicals, or you're trying to reduce inflammation, or you're trying to increase hormones.
Do you find interesting, you said if a vegetarian, a vegan comes to you, you supplement because they're missing certain amino acids.
Mhm.
And at the moment, there's the carnivore diet seems to be gaining popularity. Does it go the other way as well? And if you have someone who's eating carnivore, what are they missing?
They're missing things like the B vitamins and some of the other nutrients that you find in their multivitamin.
Right.
It's just we really need a balanced diet, and we need balance too when it comes to these supplements. I'll give you another example that I think you can really go out of whack. If you start increasing dopamine and you do nothing about serotonin, excess dopamine suppresses serotonin. And the converse is true. Excess serotonin suppresses dopamine. And that's why some people's dealing with some people are dealing with depression, and it's a problem with serotonin. So they try using 5-HTP,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't recommend. But they're using 5-HTP will work because it'll make serotonin. Like it will make serotonin within about 20 minutes. But it works for 3 or 4 weeks, and then it stops working. And nobody knows why. I suspect, I can't prove this, but I suspect the reason why is because it suppressed dopamine.
Yeah. So I guess then we think one of the things I guess a lot of us are getting, we're getting dopamine hits from this all the time. You see people addicted to their phone.
To a certain degree.
Yeah. So then the more of that's happening, that is then squashing your serotonin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why everyone's miserable.
It certainly contributes to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you find that's quite an interesting sort of segue or point really. The world is becoming more technologically advanced. Everyone seems to be attached to a phone, a computer, whatever it might be. Is that contributing to some of the symptoms that we're seeing, like ADD, or any of the other symptoms out there?
Probably. I find that when it comes to, for example, ADD and ADHD, there are different levels of severity I've discovered over the years. And how I found that out is some people can just deal with it naturally with just supplements.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've got a supplement stack for ADHD that works fantastic with or without stimulants. Now, some people do need the stimulants. They cannot operate without the stimulants. But using this stack to support ADD or ADHD will support the use of stimulants. So, my point in answering your question is somebody can be borderline, if you will, ADD or ADHD, and excess screen time might tip them over the edge.
Yeah. So these people perhaps always existed, but now because of this,
They just aggravated to the point where there's symptoms of having blown up in their face, and
yeah, that makes sense. Whereas before, probably wouldn't have manifested because they were in the field or doing whatever they were doing pre-technology.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about diet? Do you think diet comes into this a lot? Because we are living in
One of the things that I found back then, I guess it was about 8 or 10 years ago now, I felt like I wanted to die and I ended up in the ER. One of the things I just instinctively knew is I needed to clean up a diet. And when I did, I felt better.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not hard. I mean, there's no specific diet that I recommend. It's just clean up your diet. Try to eliminate processed foods, and cut back on the sugars as much as you can. But balance is important.
Balance is generally important for most things, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
And do what our grandparents told us to do, and we probably wouldn't go too far wrong. Go for walks, eat wholesome food, and that's
Really
that's kind
basic, really basic stuff. And we're
yeah,
so far away from that.
yeah, absolutely. What about the thing that the sort of the cognitive enhancers, if you like modafinil?
Modafinil,
Modafinil, yeah.
that's not a lot. I get people coming to the nootropics expert all the time because they were attracted to some one thing. And it could be modafinil or it could be one of the racetams. But this is never a first choice.
Yeah, go down a natural route first.
Go
That
down the
doesn't.
natural route first and get the fundamental support that you need, and then you can start tweaking it with things like modafinil or some of the racetams, or one that's really popular these days is methylene blue.
That's everywhere on my feed. Yeah, I see it all over the place.
Yeah, it's crazy, and people come to the website because they saw my review on methylene blue. Methylene blue is an amazing supplement. I mean, it's an electron donor, works similar to CoQ10. It's very powerful, but it does one thing basically,
Hmm.
and it donates an electron, the electron transport chain in mitochondria for the production for energy production. But it also acts like an MAOI too, so you got to be careful about it's contraindicated with a lot of prescription antidepressants, different kinds of antidepressants. You got to be careful with it. But that methylene blue would never be a first choice for somebody that came to me and that had problems with energy, for example. I would be recommending L-CAR and CoQ10 and arlopoic acid and PQQ for a little natural energy boost before I would recommend methylene blue.
Hmm. And for the people who does anyone you ever work with take something like methylene blue and it does nothing, or does it always
Yes,
work? Yeah.
no, that's a very frequent thing. And it's not just methylene blue, but other supplements have become popular for a few months. Like ashwagandha, for example, a few months was really popular.
Yeah.
So it was on you saw television commercials with Jennifer Lopez talking
Really?
about ashwagandha,
And then everybody took it.
and everybody's taking it, right? And some people it backfires on them because they've got thyroid problems and it's contraindicated with thyroid meds. Or they don't get any benefit from it at all because they don't have a problem with GABA.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So again, it comes back to that fact that we're all individual. Everyone's different. There is no panacea, no one single thing that will make everyone feel better.
There isn't, and anxiety is not caused by lack of benzos, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So anxiety is not necessarily caused by a problem with GABA receptors, and depression is not always caused by a lack of serotonin or a problem with serotonin receptors. No, it's dopamine has been, or not dopamine, depression has been found to be caused by a host of things, including inflammation,
Hmm.
lack of omega-3s, oxidative stress, and neurotransmitter dysfunction too, obviously, but it's not necessarily neurotransmitter dysfunction.
Yeah. The human body is so complex. Like we
It
are so.
really is.
I think we're always trying to look for, that one single thing to fix something, and I don't think it's quite that simple often.
There's no one pill solution. There is not a one pill solution. It really isn't.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So if someone was watching this and they're like, I've definitely got to work with David, how do they find you?
The easiest thing is just go to my website, Nootropics Expert, NOO Tropics, like living in the tropics. Nootropics Expert is my website, or my YouTube channel. I've got 128,000 subscribers, so far. It's a really popular YouTube channel. I've got hundreds of videos on for everything that you could imagine. Those are the two easiest ways to find me. Or you could just go to Google and just search for Nootropics expert, or search for David Tomen, and I'll show up at the top of the front page.
Fantastic, David. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. We'll make sure we have all of those links on this when it goes out as well.
Beautiful.
And I shall let you carry on with the rest of your day, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Alphagenix podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss next week's episode. For more resources on Alphagenix and men's health, visit alphagenix.co.uk. Until next time.